Thank you, Matt, for being here today. For those of you who have no idea who I am, my name is Tim, and I've worked at the church for about 15 years, but for the last few years, my responsibilities have kept me away from the Apple Valley campus, but I'm really excited to be here today as your substitute teacher. Pastor Matt Colomb is down in Orange County today, and his dad has been in ministry for like 5 decades, and it's his last Sunday at church, and he gets to do the message down there. So Pastor Matt and his whole family are there with his dad. I'm proud of him, proud of his dad, love his dad, and I'm glad that I get to be here with you. I'm excited to hear about the classic car show on Father's Day because I am the owner of a 93 Corolla, which I believe qualifies as a classic car. It is gorgeous. It's got some love marks down the sides, and my son has almost got his license, and so by the time Father's Day runs around, it might be even more beautiful. Hey, if you don't have a Bible, we'd love to give you a Bible or notes, so you raise a hand, we'll give them to you right now. We're going to move through Psalm 32. And Psalm 32 is this absolutely incredible offer to literally anybody who wants to have it, but our culture probably won't take advantage of what it offers because our culture has a very peculiar psychosis that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about Tupac Shakur, 7th grade biology, and a SWAT team. And so if you don't mind, open your Bibles to Psalm 32 because it's going to keep us on track and me on track as well, okay? So verse 1 says this: "Blessed is the one whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the one whose sin the Lord doesn't count against him, and in whose spirit there is no deceit." Psalm 32 starts off with this really exciting concept that, as a matter of fact, that is like the dominant concept in the New Testament. If you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, these men who lived with Jesus, listened to him, watched him, they can't stop bragging about this idea. Now, admittedly, they wrote about all sorts of crazy miracles. I know that. But as soon as they would end a miracle story, they would always pivot back to this idea, that Jesus would do something miraculous to try and prove to you that he can do a bigger thing in your life, forgive you. And then you get into the epistles, Romans and the Corinthians and Galatians, Ephesians and Colossians and Philippians and 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Over and over and over and over and over and over again, the Bible offers forgiveness. It is the dominant argument that God tries to win us over to. But our culture struggles with it because before you can get forgiveness, you have to acknowledge that something went wrong. And that's where the psychosis is embedded, right there, in that one single concept. Write this down. You've already got your first blank filled in. So exciting. The problem of sin. It's so good because I know all of you judge how quickly you can get to food at the end of church by how quickly we get through the blanks, right? We're already done with one. Our culture, ironically, tries to wrestle with the concept of sin, but they refuse to call it that. They refuse to acknowledge it that. They think of it in different terms, okay? Let's think about sin in terms of perfection or imperfection. And our culture absolutely has clear opinions about that. In a weird way, our culture is obsessed with perfection, okay? In dumb ways. And I'm using the word on purpose, in psychotic ways. Our culture wants to argue about perfection. Let's look at it from like an angle, like a feminine angle and then a masculine angle, okay? One of the ways that our culture is psychotic about the concept of perfection is how we present women in culture. We take some of our very prettiest ladies and we put them on magazine covers to like draw readers in, but you guys know, right? Every single time a photographer gets the lighting just right and the makeup just right and the hair just right and then captures the image of what is a very pretty lady's face, then he sends it off to a magazine. They edit it every single time. There is no such thing in our culture anymore as a lady who's pretty enough to be on a magazine. And so they like make her eyes a little bit bigger and then like suck in right here a little bit bigger so the cheek lines are more pronounced and like pores. No. People aren't allowed to have pores. And so they smooth all those out. And like all of a sudden now magically, this lady who's pretty is now finally good enough to be on a magazine cover. Every single magazine cover is all pretend. It's all pretend. That's insane. That's psychotic, y'all. But in guy world, we have a very similar psychosis. It's different. We like, it's aggressive and it's like comparative and it's like this way to like measure up to this impossible standard. We have GOAT arguments, right? Like Joe Montana or Tom Brady. I'm frustrated with both of them because neither of them were ever Chargers, okay? But in basketball, there is this dominating argument about who's the GOAT, Michael Jordan or LeBron James. And we pot shot and we criticize and we're like, oh this and oh that. And ironically, in Southern California, most people get frustrated that LeBron's even in the conversation, right? It's like Michael or Kobe, but whatever. Here's the funny thing. If you invite LeBron James and have him stand next to your body, okay? He's 7'13" of pure chiseled granite. He can move like a gazelle. And if I brought him and I stood him right here and we started to talk about him in person the way we talk about him behind his back, you would all fear for my life. Like, Tim, shut up. That is a marvelous creature. Just let him be. But it doesn't matter because we're psychotic and we want to argue about this impossible standard of perfection. But we know it's impossible. So not only are we trying to prescribe in an argumentative way, the concept of perfection in femininity, the concept of perfection in masculinity, but then we all know that we're not perfect. So let's say you did something like Memorial Day, you went to the park with your kids. And let's say, shockingly, your kids are like everyone else's kids. They ain't perfect. And so you're sitting there and someone's sitting on the bench next to you and they're watching your kids and your kids do something that's not perfect. And then they turn to you, and then they give you a piece of advice. Your first reaction is, oh my gosh, thank you so much for taking time, effort, and why are you laughing? And energy out of your day to put thought into my life and to notice something about my children. Meanwhile, your children are naked and lighting things on fire, okay? But whatever. And now you've shared with me some encouragement, some insight, and I can take that and I can build on that because everybody can learn something from anybody. No, it is not. You quote Tupac and you're like, only God can judge me. Back off. Your kids are a wreck. That's the natural reaction, right? We view the concept of perfection in our culture as this impossible standard that none of us can get to. And then when it comes to our own imperfection, we say, you can't judge me because you're jacked up too. That's the psychosis, okay? That we demand perfection from others, but we always excuse it in ourselves. That's psychotic, y'all. That is not a logical system. It's self-defeating. If that was the way that you were trying to run your business would fail. But it's the way our culture deals with the concept of guilt. And in Psalm 32, he pushes us towards this other concept. The concept of forgiveness, but there's a door you go through to get it, okay? And it's the door that's going to pull us into talking about 7th grade biology and a SWAT rescue, that the door is something that not even Christians like walking through. And that's what's crazy to me. And so there's a better way to solve the tension between this desire for perfection, but we're stuck in our own imperfection. And David wrote about dealing with guilt and imperfection in this way. Look at verse 3. He says, when I kept silent, my bones wasted away. Through my groaning all day long, for day and night, your hand was heavy on me. My strength was sapped as in the heat of summer. All right, a few things here. Number one, he's using a bunch of physical imagery, right? Things that everyone can relate to. If you've ever been just really sick and really run down, he's got this really expressive phrase, my bones wasted away. He's got another phrase, groaning all day long. He's got another phrase, your hand was heavy on me. He's got another phrase, my strength was sapped like I was stuck on the pass in summertime with no AC, okay? He's got all of these very physical descriptions. And if you take it all the way back to the beginning of verse 3, what does he say? Kicks all of this off. When I kept silent. Not when I messed up, when I kept silent. He's talking about the exhaustion and the drain of power in his life when he's quiet about his imperfection, okay? And so let's talk about it from another angle. Let's talk about it from, I know that this is going to be very difficult for you to learn, but I sometimes make mistakes. And I know you're in shock and you're like, no, but not in the past. No, even in the present. I have a brilliant wife who picked, out of billions of men, she picked the best one to be married to, okay? And no, for real. And and he's a pastor, and he studies the Bible and stuff, and he's got a balanced nutritional diet, and he listens to podcasts. But every 3 years or so, I get really tired from doing the Lord's work, and I'll step out of line, and I'll snap at her. And I know that breaks your image of me, but I will. And it's every 1,000 days, okay? I'm like a cicada or something like that, but and I'll snap at her. And I want to reveal something that's even worse about me. My first reaction when I snap at my wife is to justify my behavior because of something she did, right? If she'd only done this, or if she'd only known that, or if she'd only blah, 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 right? And I know none of you do that. I know none of you snap at another person and then use their behavior to justify your reaction, but I unfortunately do, okay? And it took me a long time for me to be able to quickly move past that to owning, no, actually, that was me. That was mine. And hopefully now, the older I get, the more quickly the transition is for me blaming her for my bad behavior to me owning it. But once I own it, this is where I live. Verses 3 and 4. It starts to sit on me, right? And this is the part we don't like. This is why our culture is psychotic about dealing with their guilt, because nobody likes this. As soon as you can mature and own your own stuff, then you now have to inherit the consequences of your behavior. And that's the part that sucks. And so I start to literally think, and man, she didn't deserve that. Matter of fact, I start to think back, I've got a pretty bad memory. I can remember 5 days worth of things. If you ask me a question that goes back 6 days, you have to Google it because I don't remember. But in the last 5 days, I guarantee you my wife has done kind things for me. And now all of those things are playing through my head. And I'm like, doggone it. She was so nice to me yesterday, and she's probably going to do something nice tomorrow. And it starts to why did I do that? Why did I do that? And then I think back across the span of all time in existence. I'm like, man, Tim, when she married you, you were like a broke youth pastor at a broke little church. You made $11 a year, and she stuck with you, man. Come on, brother, what is wrong with you? And then I start to think, man, it's not just your husband. You're a pastor, bro. How can you mess this up and be a pastor? You read your Bible this morning, Tim. Was it for nothing? You're stupid and evil. What is going on? And it starts to compound in me, right? Well, that's what David's talking about. He's talking about that compoundingness of when we start to think through what it is that we've broken, that really, honestly, there's a lot of breaking in yourself. And that's frustrating. And why is it, tell me, why is it that the most common person that I break things with is my favorite person in the world? If I was in a superhero movie, the bad guy tried to pit me to fail undoubtedly, Tim, you can either save this boat of people or only your wife. I'm like, they're going to drown, okay? They just are, because I'm saving my wife. But she's the one that, and then my kids are my second favorite group of people. Well, they drive me crazy, but they're my second favorite group of people in the whole world. And it seems like they're the ones that I break next. And then I work with a really fantastic group of men and women at this church. We're not the brightest group. We don't have the best ideas, but they're good people. And I jack with them. And then people in this church, it is embarrassing to be a pastor at a church knowing full well you've let people down. And I'm like, oh, sorry, it's a shock. I just have. And then now the people in my life that don't even believe in Jesus, God, not them too. I don't want to let them down too. And our culture can't deal with the frustration of these phrases, the wasting away of bones, the groaning, the heavy hand. And in the discomfort of this moment, in the discomfort of that reality, that's when they demand perfection from you and excuse it in themselves because they have no idea how to get out of this. How do you get out of this? It's super embarrassing. It's the dumbest thing that's ever happened. I was playing catch with my son with a football, and I jammed my finger so bad that my finger looked like a small cucumber, and I had to go to the urgent care, and they saw it, and they're like, oh, we have to cut your wedding ring off right now. And so I sat in the waiting room, waiting, and there's this dude over in the waiting room, and I'm super sorry if you're here today, and I'm ratting you out. I don't even know your name. But he's just groaning, and it was stressing me out. I wanted to yell at him, dude, I might die from a sprained finger. I need you to not groan all day long. Because the agitation in others wears on you. So now you live in a culture that is this snowball effect that they're groaning and you're feeling guilty, and it just loops and it loops and it loops. And here's what it does. It makes you defeated about yourself and angry at others. And so you want to know a huge reason why the culture we live in is toxic? It's because they don't know how to move past verse 4. They're stuck with bones wasting and groaning and heat and traffic and disappointment and sin. And that's where it is. And what's crazy is that he discusses all of these things that we know we have, and you, as a believer, are given a habit. You're given a practice. You're given a concept. You're given an invitation to say, you can very regularly be done with this. But it's done because we avoid things we don't like, even if we know it's good for us, and we avoid the thing that's offered to us. Write this down. Oh, we're flying. Second blank already done. The promise of forgiveness. The promise of forgiveness is right through this door. And this is what we want to avoid. Verse 5. Then I acknowledged my sin to you. Nope, that sucks even worse. I'm not going to do that. For sure, I'm not going to do that. No. Did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord. That's it. That's your pivot moment. You can literally step out of the toxicity of our culture by embracing this one phrase. I acknowledged my sin to you and didn't cover up my iniquity. And it sounds weak and it sounds like, Tim, I know, I did that once at a Harvest Crusade or at camp. No. You got to do it to maintain that clarity, that relation. Let me explain it this way. My family attends this service, okay, at this campus, and I don't know why the biological reason exists. For whatever reason, when I'm done with an 11 a.m. church service, my body feels like it has never had food in its life. I'm more hungry at 12:20 p.m. on Sunday than at any other point in human history, okay? And then I start to panic. Because I know my kids are going to talk with their friends after church, and it's going to slow me down from getting to protein, okay? I know my wife's going to want to talk with her friends and catch up with people. Meanwhile, I'm over here tweaking out because of blood sugar levels, okay? And then even worse, then we get in the van. Oh, we drive a minivan because I'm a baller. And because we got a million kids, we start to talk about what we're going to do for food. And here's the wonderful blessing about having children. They're always frustrated with you no matter what. And so we start to ask, hey, what should we do for food? First person will speak up. Second person definitely thinks that idea is dumb. And then the third person's like, well, have we considered this? And the fourth person, we can get through the whole van. And by the time everyone has shared their idea, by the way, all of them have nutritional value. But by the time everyone has shared their idea, the last person has changed their mind. And then they offer a seventh option. My family of 6 can have 9 opinions for lunch and never settle. And so then that's when it starts to get a little Lord of the Flies in the minivan. I mean, I know your minivan is better than mine, but my minivan, they will turn on each other. I will cut you if you don't let me go to Del Taco, right? I hope you understand that there is very little exaggeration in this. And so my children are not like your children. My children make mistakes, and one of them will snap at another one, and then I've got to be a good father. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. And that felt more sarcastic than it was in my head. Whatever kid attacked another kid, I'll tell them, hey, you got to apologize. And they'll mumble, I'm sorry that you're stupid and you don't see that my idea is better. No. I need you to admit it, I need you to explain it, and I need you to tell it to the person. And that sequence is beyond most adults that you live with. And it's not fun. My kids are resistant to it for the same reason you might be. I don't want to admit it, I don't want to articulate or clarify it, and I do not want to direct it to somebody. I just don't. Because now, the thing that I'm aware of just on my own, the thing that's causing my bones to waste and my groaning and my aching and the strength to be gone from me, I'm already aware of it. And now, Dad, you want me to say it out loud and give all of that resource to another person so that they can throw a label on me and like absolutely validate what I'm afraid of about myself? No, I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to sarcastically divert attention and quote Tupac and only God can judge me and just bounce away from this. I still do this. I'm a grown man and I still do this. I'll pop off at one of my kids and then make it to the end of the day and they're all in bed and me and my wife are laying there and talking through the day. And I know that this is the mature thing to do. I'm aware of that. And so I'll start to talk through and I do this weird half confessional thing with my wife that I feel like if I tell my wife I popped off at one of the kids, that counts. And that's an apology, and that's clarifying, and that's admitting it, and that's good enough. And she's like, oh, well, how did they react when you apologized? And I'm like, well, I don't know what you mean. That feels very direct. And she's like, well, I mean, you just did a great job with me. You admitted it, and you clarified it, and you told me who the offense was aimed at. What a great, healthy, mature, spiritual, Christ-like, eternal sequence that was, Tim. How did they respond when you told them? I mean, I haven't told them yet. I was waiting until they got married. And she's like, oh, okay. So then you just want them to learn things that you don't do? I'm like, oh, that feels real direct. Because when you admit it and you clarify it, and then you tell it to someone, all of a sudden now you're floating above what culture does with sin, guilt, imperfection, and you're introducing a path where it can be resolved. Not covered up, not magically argued away, but where it can be resolved. Verse 5 says, I acknowledged my sin to you and didn't cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. But we're terrified about that part. We're worried that if we admit and we clarify and we direct, that now we're giving them a label, and in giving them a label, we've given them a weapon, and now they're going to use that label or their weapon to bury me. And I'm barely hanging on already because my bones are wasting, and my soul is groaning, and I'm embarrassed, and I'm not covered, and I'm weak, and everybody knows it, but as long as I don't say it, maybe they won't turn it against me. David's like, oh my gosh, guys, here's the thing. I told the most powerful, the most wise, the most pure being in the universe, and what he did with it is he didn't weaponize it. He's like, cool, now we're fixed. And he forgave me. Rods and cones. I learned about this a little bit this week. I know I should have learned more because some of you are molecular biologists and you're going to be disappointed in me. I'm going to say that you have things in your eyes, and that's where I'm embarrassed. I don't know what that thing is. I don't know if it's a chemical or a protein or a compound. I don't know, but they're called photoreceptors. I know that. And you have two types of photoreceptors in your eyeballs, okay? One is called a rod, and one is called a cone. Now, you learned this in junior high biology, but you super didn't care, and so you don't know. It's amazing, okay? Rods, you have millions of, and they're to help you see when you can't normally see. In the dark, your rods leap into action, and they're like, oh, shoot, we got this. I've got 1 million kids, and that means I haven't slept for 17 years. God bless you if you think that you've got a baby and oh man, do you guys remember the first time you slept through the night with the baby? You thought, we made it. We're going to start sleeping again. No, you'll never sleep again. By the time your kids are old enough to not get sick through the night, your back hurts from sleeping that long. You just can't sleep that long ever again, okay? So 17 years, I've had to get up during the night and interact with kids, right? And when you wake up in the night, you're using rods in your eyeballs. And even though it's dark, your rods help your brain see shapes and depth. But that's it. And that's why when you walk through the house, you step on Legos and stub your toe and bump your shoulder into things. And you're like, what is going on? Like, I know my house. I can see it. Helen Keller could do a better job right now. What is wrong with me? I'm so frustrated with myself because your rods are like helping you just barely get by, okay? But you have another photoreceptor in your eye, and it's called a cone. You've got way less of those, but they're incredible. They see texture and movement and color. Like, it explodes. The difference between using your rods and using your cones is massive. There's like no comparison. The world comes alive when you can use your cones. 1 John chapter 1 says this. This is the message we have heard from him and we declare to you. God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. If we claim we have fellowship with him and yet we walk in the darkness, we lie and we don't live out the truth. And so you can learn to live in darkness and keep limping along with only your rods, or as a believer, you can say, no, I want to use everything God has given me. I love movement and texture and color. I love to engage with the world around me. I want to use everything He's given me. And my culture is going to keep seeing the faint shape of perfection and guilt, knowing that they should do something about it, but they're going to keep stubbing their toe over and over and over and over by demanding perfection from you and excusing it in themselves. Or I can say, man, Psalm 32, 1 John, that God is light, and I'm going to invite His light right into my imperfection. The very thing I don't want to do is the exact thing you should do. And that's what pushes me to this SWAT story. So years ago at the church, I had a buddy who was on the SWAT team for Covina. Is it Covina or West Covina? I don't know. Anyway, he told me, hey, Tim, one night in a couple of weeks, we're going to do hostage rescue training. Do you want to be a part of it? And I thought, yes. You want me to teach those guys how to successfully, carefully negotiate with the bad guy in a way that's persuasive, maybe a little bit of humor pulled in, maybe some Bible verses so that we get the hostages free. He's like, no. We need hostages. And I'm like, oh, you need someone who's so quick on their feet that like when the bad guy captures me, I'm able to escape down to your truck. So we drive away. He's like, no, Tim, shut up. We need you to get caught and sit in a room. And I'm like, what? Seems like a waste of my talent, but okay. So I go down. A group of 5 of us go down. And we're waiting at this 4-story office building down in Covina. And it's dusk, and the training is going to happen during the night. And I'm a grown man, right? But man, sitting there in the parking lot, realizing that this abandoned building has no electricity, like all the power's turned off, and I'm going to be somewhere in it during the night, I got started to get just right on the edge of nervous. Not actually, okay, but a little bit. And then the transport vehicle with all the officers arrived, and they all get out, and they're geared up. And whoo, man, my nerves from 1 went to like 2 for sure, okay? And they're starting to get ready and assembled. They know their business. I have no idea what's going to go on. The guy that's going to run the training came over and talked to his group, and he said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to continually put you guys in different scenarios in the building. My guys are going to, run the scenario, rescue you, and then we're going to debrief, and then we're going to reset you again. So it's a lot of waiting on your part, but we're going to do this for probably 4-ish hours tonight. You guys ready? And I'm like, whew, I don't know. I mean, that sounds terrible, actually, now that I've thought this through. And he said, oh, by the way, we try and make these scenarios as realistic as possible, so if you guys can really act like you're afraid, it would help. And I'm like, shoot, son, I got you. Like, suddenly I am perfect for this role. And so there's one off-duty law enforcement guy, and he's the bad guy, okay? He's the one who's taken us hostage. And over, we're like in different places in the building, and for the most part, he's only with one of us, and he will put other hostages in a room so that when the good guys come in, they're distracted by all the bodies, and they've got to make a lot of decisions quickly, because there's only one dangerous thing. The rest of it is like good, right? Like I want to live. And one of the scenarios, I was the special hostage. Finally, they saw my talent. The bad guy, who, by the way, is an off-duty good guy, hid some of the people around this room So when the SWAT team came in, they were literally going to have to sweep past all the other good guy bodies before they got to the bad guy. The bad guy literally was standing behind me. He had a firearm to this side of my head. Don't worry, I had gear on. I had a paintball mask. And then he was standing completely behind me, and his face was watching over this shoulder. And do you remember in Jurassic Park? I don't know. I know I'm old, okay? Boom. Boom, and the cup is shaking, and you're like, dude, we're on the 3rd floor, and we hear them enter the building, and then there's a lot of noise at first, and then the room gets quiet, and then somebody yelled, clear, and then they'd move to another room, boom, couple shouts, quiet, clear, and they'd move, boom, some yelling, quiet, clear, and I was pretty nervous. What terrified me is the guy behind me started to get more and more nervous. He's a good guy, okay? But he knows what's going to happen. And all of a sudden, I'm putting it all together. I'm like, wait a second. He's scared of the men who are about to burst in this room. I am currently standing in between him and those men. It is dark, and I am scared, and I am not going to act afraid. I am going to be afraid. And finally, it was our turn. Boom. And all I remember is flashes of light. A couple of the guys, I don't know how many, had flashlights that were attached to the scopes of their rifles. The power of 1,000 suns entered that room. And there is no movie that can do them justice. Guys, I'm not kidding. In like 0.8 seconds, they had swept the room, found the bad guy, and put 3 rounds of paint right in the guy's face mask, and he like drops to the floor. He pulls me with him, and I am screaming like a 13-year-old girl. I'm not the bad guy. I'm not the bad guy. Which, by the way, should have been convincing, because I'm 100% certain that bad guys don't yell, I'm not the bad guy, okay? And I'm laying there, and I just can't believe, ooh, okay, never again, okay? When they stepped into the room, they knew that danger was there. They just chose to be grown men and say, if there is danger present, I want all the light that I can get, because I want to find where it is, and I need to take care of it right now. You have no concept how fast they took care of that room. It was absolutely amazing. But we Christians want to justify our own imperfection with the same psychotic ethic that our culture does, and justify and make excuses and ignore, because we don't want God's protective light to step into your life. You don't want to restore your marriage because that would involve light being shown right where you want to conceal. You don't want to consistently reconcile with your kids because you don't want to deal with what's in the room. That's crazy, y'all. That's not smart. Because David says, man, when I confessed to God, when I acknowledged, he forgave. And it was terrifying to say, God, step into this room and put light right here. That was nerve-wracking for me. It's just that when I saw what he was able to do in a room with some light, I was blown away. And there is no movie that will ever convince me more than what I saw that day in person, that if I'm ever in trouble, I want SWAT to rescue me. I'll tell you that right now. And what I want is I want you to become convinced, not of a Christian habit like, all right, I needed to add that in. I want you to be so doggone impressed with the person and character of God that when you tell him, God, I want light right here, that when you see his response, verse 6, therefore let all the faithful pray to you where you may be found. Surely the rising of mighty waters ain't going to reach me, because God has got my back. You are my hiding place. You protect me from trouble. You surround me with songs of deliverance. Write down the last thing, the payoff of righteousness. Man, when God looks at you and you forgave the guilt of my sin, you feel so much better than bad. It's different than that. You feel grateful, you feel impressed, you feel safe. When I confess things to my wife, she does not hold them against me. And so in an ironic way, I have now built more trust with my wife. I've built more trust with my kids. I'm in better shape than I was at ground zero. And that's where David is saying in this psalm. He goes on and he says, verse 8, all right, so then here's what I know. I'm going to instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I'm going to counsel you with my loving eye on you. Don't be like a horse or a donkey. They have no understanding, and they got to be controlled by bit and bridle, or they won't come to you. The people in your world, they might be believers, they might be unbelievers. When they don't know what to do with their guilt, they're controlled by people's reactions over and over. You work with some of them, don't you? And part of the reason you don't like going to work is because when you get there, you deal with people, their bones are wasting away. And there's a heavy hand on them. And because they're perpetually disappointed in themselves and angry with others, they're hard to deal with. Well, if you step into the habit of confession with God, and you know what He does with your sin, now all of a sudden you step into them, and you don't have to be controlled by their reaction. You don't have to be a donkey in our culture. You can look at them and say, oh my gosh, I know what that's like. I've got so much compassion for them. When you're out, it's about to get real. When you're out at the Little League fields, and some of those parents are yelling at 7-year-olds like they're supposed to be Derek Jeter, and you can see in them the tension and the disappointment and the fear that is obviously about themselves being projected onto kids who might not remember which base to run to first. You can see like, man, I know what it's like to have my bones waste away and to have a heavy hand sitting on me and to groan, and it just comes out in this psychosis. Quit expecting perfection from them and excusing it in yourself. You can do one of two things. You can walk through culture and be like, oh man, my pastor said you're psychotic. No. That's probably not the best way to do it. Best way is to say, I recognize the psychosis in you, and it's going to motivate me to do Scripture, to engage God, to say, God, I want a light. And yeah, I'm embarrassed that I'm a 41-year-old pastor and I still need to be in the habit of confession. But man, I tell you what, it makes me remember He is heroic. And I don't have to be, because I can brag about a hero that can save your life. And so as we close today, I want you to be so in love with the concept of confession as a way to wholeness and forgiveness. But even more than that, I want you to be deeply impressed with the character, the brilliance, the strength, the purity of God, that when you do that with Him, He looks at you with pride and a protectiveness that no one else in our culture can offer. It's gorgeous. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for the directness of your word. God, I absolutely need to hear from you that there are things wrong in my life, and that I have to acknowledge my sin to you. God, that's good for me. It's not bad. So that I can take my bones wasting, my groaning, the heavy hand that sits on my life, and now I can act on it. God, I can be a grown man and want light right in the dangerous part of the room. And so, God, I pray for us as a people, that as we consider this, that it's not just once upon a time at a summer camp or at a harvest crusade, but God, that as a habit, as a tool in my relationship with you, I pursue confession. And God, when I interact with you and you cover it, God, now I pray that you'd make HDC mature in this culture, that we'd be light. The people in my oikos that still have their bones wasting in them, God, help us to give them something that's good. God, we love you a ton. Help us to act like we trust you. In your name we pray. Amen.